Thanks very much for staying with us. Time now for Eye on Africa with me, Georgia Calvin-Smith. Tonight, as Nigerian Boko Haram militants ramp up attacks in northern Cameroon with 3 in less than 24 hours, we take a look at some of the damage that their cross-border violence has wrought to the most traditional forms of regional trade in the area. Also, Nigerian fishermen communities from the Niger Delta try their luck once more in the London courts. The Igale and the Bile people are suing Shell for polluting their water and land with oil and say that they can't trust their own courts with the job. And an Egyptian appeals court quashes one of 2 life sentences handed down to Mohamed Morsi. It's the former president's second appeals victory in a week. But first, suspected Boko Haram extremists have launched 3 attacks in northern Cameroon in under 24 hours. Only one of the strikes, blamed on the Nigerian militants, was fatal. 6 soldiers were killed on Monday night at a military camp at Darak on Lake Chad. Another attack was reportedly launched in Dinguina, and a third attempted suicide raid was thwarted at Kolofata camp. There, a young woman allegedly tried to target soldiers near a camp for people displaced by Boko Haram's insurgency. Now, their cross-border attacks have not only cost lives, but also livelihoods, as the danger disrupts trade. Our correspondent sent us this report.
This is the southwesterlymost point in the trans-Saharan trade route. Camel meat and urine are believed to possess health benefits in this part of the world. The Boko Haram insurgency put a stop to camel caravans until recently. This man is among the first in several years to drive camels from Chad to Nigeria. His journey was fraught with danger.
On
the way here, we encountered Boko Haram. They tried to steal my horse. They've come to realize that the goods we buy and transport are of value. They cause us a lot of problems.
Maiduguri has bounced back and is once again the busiest trading hub in the northeast of the country. But the 7-year-long insurgency now being fought in the far fringes of the state is taking its toll on cross-border trade. And the worst recession in Nigeria's history and the devaluation of the naira is being felt here. The city's Chamber of Commerce is back up and running, and its president hopes that francophone traders will return in greater numbers.
It's an advantage to our brothers that come from the francophone countries when they come with, for example, a million sefa, and they get only 450,000 naira before, they almost get 1 million naira now. So you see our loss is also their gain.
Before the insurgency, 20 trucks laden with made-in-Nigeria goods bound for neighbouring countries would leave this area of the city every day. A year ago, this trade route had ground to a halt because all roads leading out of Maiduguri had been closed by the military. Over the past few months, the cross-border trade has resumed, but transport costs have soared due to continued insecurity.
There are rumours that the border has reopened fully, but it's not true. It's not possible to travel to the Gamburu-Gala border alone. You need a military escort because there are still some insurgents in the border region.
The road to recovery in this fractious region remains littered with risks. But a period of relative peace is paving the way for the return of some brave francophone traders.
Well, suspected Boko Haram militants launched 3 attacks in northern Cameroon in under 24 hours, as mentioned at the top of our bulletin there. And London's High Court has begun hearing lawsuits filed by communities of Nigerian farmers and fishermen against multinational oil company Shell. The Igale and the Bile people live in the Niger Delta and say that environmental damage caused by oil pollution has destroyed lives and left water contaminated with a carcinogenic compound. In 2011, a UN report warned of the serious threat to public health posed by water tainted by hydrocarbons.
To compel Shell to take immediate action and implement the United Nations report. They are very specific. Go provide them water. Go take medical history. Go and see what you have done and help. It's very specific in English language, not in Eleme language. So Shell cannot pretend they don't know this.
Well, the damage was allegedly caused by SPDC, a subsidiary of Shell, but complainants say that they can't trust their own Nigerian courts to hear the case. Shell's already paid out over $80 million in compensation to another Niger Delta community for damage caused by oil spills. Well, in other news, gunmen opened fire on a school in northeastern Kenya on Tuesday as students were taking an exam. Luckily, no one was injured in the shooting. 6 policemen were guarding the site at the time and exchanged fire with the attackers at Abakure High School in Ujia County before they fled. And about a dozen Congolese opposition groups banded together on Tuesday to launch a campaign that's been dubbed Bye Bye Kabila. The movement is aimed at getting President Joseph Kabila to constitutionally stand down and rule himself out from staying on in power. The leader's been accused of delaying preparations for presidential elections so that he could stay in the job beyond the end of his mandate. Polls had been due by the end of this year, but have been pushed back until at least late 2017. Well, communities in eastern DRC have long lived under the threat of attack by one of them various militia group who hide out around the area. Over the last 2 years, the town of Beni has been the scene of repeated massacres. The violence has been blamed on a group of Ugandan rebels called the ADF. This week, in a surprise move, they released a dozen hostages, instructing them to tell the army to end its fight back against the militants. Nicolas Chemin tells us more.
These farmers from Beni feared for their lives. It is extremely rare for the ADF rebels to release hostages. They were held for 2 weeks and the insurgents told them to deliver this message.
The rebels send out a warning to the army and the UN. They tell them to stop their attacks. They say they bought their land at the time of Mobutu. They say every time they lose a man, they need to kill 10 civilians. Every time a bomb is dropped on them, they must slit the throats of 10 civilians.
But the army spokesman said operations against the ADF would continue.
They are negative forces that we must fight against. We put pressure on them. This is what enabled the release of our fellow citizens.
Since October 2014, massacres in the region of Beni have left 700 people dead according to the UN, 1,300 according to a group of NGOs. The government and the UN say the ADF is responsible for these deaths. It's a Ugandan rebel group whose objectives remain unclear. Some experts say it has accomplices within the army, an allegation Kinshasa denies. Beni's 800,000 residents are tired of all these killings, and the release of these hostages was a welcome surprise.
An Egyptian court quashed one of 2 life sentences handed down to ousted ex-president Mohamed Morsi. A judge has ordered a retrial for the Islamist leader who was sentenced in 2015 on charges of spying for foreign militant groups. It's his latest legal victory after his death sentence was overturned last week.
2 down, 1 to go. Egypt's top appeals court overturned a life sentence against ousted President Mohamed Morsi and 16 former Muslim Brotherhood officials on charges of spying for and collaborating with Iran, Hamas, and Hezbollah.
The court has ruled to accept the Prosecutor General's objection to the case.
The same court also dismissed a death sentence against Morsi last week for taking part in a series of prison breaks in 2011. Both of the overturned cases will now go to retrial, yet this is no get-out-of-jail-free card for the ousted president. The court will start reviewing Morsi's second life sentence for allegedly handing confidential documents over to Qatar next week. Morsi also has to serve 20 years for illegally detaining and torturing protesters in 2012, a verdict which was confirmed last month. Democratically elected after the 2011 ousting of Hosni Mubarak, Mohamed Morsi was overthrown by mass street protests in 2013. His successor, the General Abdel Fattah al-Sisi, has since conducted a violent crackdown against the Muslim Brotherhood, a group which the Egyptian government has labeled a terrorist organization.
Well, the Ivory Coast has thrown its support for the International Criminal Court, saying that it will not leave the World Court. So says the country's president, Alassane Ouattara. The world's first permanent war crimes court's been under a lot of pressure since Gambia, South Africa and Burundi all said that they would be leaving. Kenya's parliament's also considering following suit. Gambia has accused the world body of ignoring the war crimes of Western nations and seeking only to prosecute Africans. Ivory Coast says that leaving will only harm the victims.
These are sovereign decisions, but Ivory Coast will not quit the ICC. And I think that most countries have that desire. It's about fighting against impunity. That's in our interest. We must start with justice on a national level, and if possible, on a regional and continental level. But that isn't the case today in our continent, so the ICC is doing its job, often following requests from African states and African authorities.
Oh, finally, Cameroon's indomitable Lionesses are through to the semi-finals of the Women's Africa Cup of Nations. This after they beat South Africa 1-0 in their second Group A match on Tuesday. The hosts, Ngo Belek, scored the only goal of the game in the 83rd minute. Well, that's it for Eye on Africa for now. Remember, you can always catch up with more news from the continent and from around the world by checking out France 24's website at www.france24.com. Thanks very much for joining us, and please do so again if you can. Take care.